he sat me down one day and he said, have you ever had a panic attack? And I was like, what's a panic attack? And he's like, well, this is what my panic attacks feel like. And I was like, oh, all day, every day for like the last 7 years or however long, starting in law school. That's my life.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Defense Never Rests. I am your host, Trisha Baxter, and today we are talking about what you do when you hate your job. A lot of lawyers at a certain year mark, 5 to 7 was my experience, and claims adjusters that are stressed with overloaded claims files or too many claims they're handling. They just don't like what the position is, where they are now and what their job is. And this is what this episode is about, is talking to two people that have gone through that journey already, what issues they had, what challenges they had, and how they made it through those challenges. And for that, I have two awesome guests who I've gotten to know through LinkedIn. They're so active on LinkedIn, and a lot of it has to do with this kind of situation and helping lawyers and people find their path and their way in their careers. So without further ado, the first up, ladies first, Annie Little. She is a practicing lawyer turned career coach. Did I get that right?
Yep. No longer practicing, but I was.
Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
And then last but not least, Alex Su. He is the Director of Business Development at Eversort. Am I saying that correctly too?
You are.
So welcome, Alex. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So let's get started. Annie, I want to throw it to you. Tell us briefly what your journey has been in your career.
Sure. It's kind of interesting because although I left law, I practiced for 7 years. Like you said, the 5 to 7 year mark, year 5 was where I was really, really pretty sure I was done or something really big had to change. But unlike a lot of people that I work with, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. Like I investigated it. It was something I wanted to do. I worked in law firms in college. So I did it all. And so it was like kind of crazy that I got to a point where I was like, ooh, I actually did it. I have it and I hate it. So I did boutique firms. So I didn't do big law, but I had very sort of like high-end clientele. So my first firm, I worked at a boutique lending firm, and we specialized in small business administration loans, which is super relevant now, but I practiced during the Great Recession, and our practice literally ground to a halt in about a day. So that was a really good learning experience, though. I'd been in practice for 2 years, and it was really great to see the partners in my firm learn how to pivot just by listening to our clients and how their needs shifted. And so we shifted to meet those needs. And then shockingly, in the middle of the crisis in 2010, I was headhunted to a local real estate boutique firm, which was great because I was feeling really pigeonholed in my government guaranteed lending practice. It was cool because it was nationwide. But although it wasn't litigation, I had like a massive workload. So I did relate to my litigation friends who were in that. So I was really excited to get to kind of dive deeper into the real estate finance end of things. But I'd say within like 2 months, I was like, nope, still don't like it. And so I started, because it was a real estate boutique, that meant we did everything related to real estate. So, litigation, land use. I was in the transactional group. So I did a lot of lending and commercial leasing. And so people were really open with allowing me to help them. So I'd write briefs for people and I would do some corporate stuff for the other groups. But after like doing a couple assignments, I was like, nope, still bored. Like, what am I going to do? So I found a coach. I found a life coach, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And honestly, because I always wanted to be a lawyer and I knew what I was getting into, I was completely shocked when I had the realization that I did not want to be a lawyer anymore. I was done. So I got pregnant and I was like, all right, here's my hard goal. Like 9 months from now, I'm done. I'm going to, ride out my maternity leave and then I'm not coming back. And so that was like right about the seven year mark. I was out and started my coaching business while I was pregnant, so that when I came back from maternity leave, I could head that way. And that's where I've been for 7 years now.
That's awesome. And we're going to do a deep dive into both of your stories, but I do want to get to Alex too. So Alex, tell us what your journey was and where you're at now.
Sure. So I went to law school because I wanted to be a trial lawyer. That was the goal from the beginning. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself the best way to do that was to become a federal prosecutor. So I tried to follow a very rigid and linear career path. I came up with a plan when I was 21, said I would clerk, work for a big firm, and then jump to the U.S. Attorney's Office to become a trial lawyer. So all along the way, I think there were some doubts, especially in law school, when I started thinking, well, my personality isn't quite the same as what I'm seeing from a lot of prosecutors. Maybe there were certain things that I didn't feel like I was very good at, that a lot of my classmates felt it seemed like they were so good at. But I still worked hard, and I tried to make the career path work. I clerked. I had the opportunity to work for a big law firm. But somewhere along the way, I realized, well, I wanted to be a trial lawyer. But all the jobs that I was taking had to do with solitary legal research, document review, lots of grunt work. And that wasn't what I wanted to do. So that was probably the first time I thought, I remember there was a time we were assigned, a group of us, we were on a big case, and there were a bunch of us associates. We were supposed to create a privilege log. And, as a junior, and I'm seeing some nodding and smiling. Yeah. So I'm sure you guys.
Privilege logs are the worst.
They're the worst. If you haven't experienced them, thank God. But there were a bunch of us junior associates on it. And, it's pretty normal to expect that a junior associate or first or second year would be working on it. But there was this partner who was basically leading the effort to create the privilege log. And he was we were on these calls with the client. And, this is a guy who graduated, at the time, probably 15 years ago, 20 years ago, had clerked, had a very strong legal background. And his job in that conference call was to walk through each line with the client. And this may be a function of the firm that I was at, but I thought I had a visceral reaction. I said, this is not where I want my career headed. I wanted to be like Tom Cruise in A Few Good Men. I didn't want to, I didn't want to do this grunt work. So, that kind of was probably the beginning of when I started thinking about what to do next. That was also when I was around a mid-level, third or fourth year in big law. So, I tried a couple of different things. I opened my own practice. I went to a smaller firm actually first. I went on the plaintiff side. That didn't work out. I tried to start my own firm. That didn't work out. But those experiences helped me understand that, I really liked interacting and working with people, probably, extroverted. And that's probably why I wanted to be a trial lawyer in the first place. So I was living in San Francisco Bay Area. I was thinking like, well, what can I do now? Like, I'm kind of lost. I'm 32, 33 years old, 5-6 years out of law school, not sure what I should do. So I thought, well, I really enjoyed sales and marketing when I had my own practice. And when you have your own business, you kind of gravitate towards the things you like to do. So I thought, well, maybe I should do sales, and who would value the experience that I have? And so I found a legal tech startup that was doing e-discovery, which I had a lot of experience in, doing a lot of doc reviews. So I made the jump, and from there, stayed in the legal tech space. That was about 4 years ago now. So I've made my way to Evisort now, still, doing sales and business development to legal. So I get to leverage some of my legal background, but also get to work with people all the time.
What do you think, and I'll throw this to either one of you, whoever wants to jump in. What do you think it is about the practice of law? And I'll even loop in like the claims adjusters handling claims. What do you think about that fundamentally makes a lot of people unhappy? And let me just sidestep that question for a moment to say, I had very similar experiences to both of you, that maybe around the 7-year mark, I hated it. I hated being a lawyer. I was a litigation lawyer, all on the civil defense side, and working so many hours. It was not uncommon for me to get in the office by 6 a.m. and stay till 8 or 9 and do that consistently. And I was single pre-kids at that point, but it was a lot of stress, and I hated it. And I didn't know, and I had a ton of lawyer friends. I was, my circle was lawyers, and nobody else liked it. So what do you think it is about our professions that makes people hate them?
I can go
Yeah.
first if you want, Alex.
Go ahead.
Go for it, Danny.
So, I work with lawyers. I am a lawyer, so I know for sure. And I imagine this would be similar. And you can stop me if I'm way off base, Trisha. But at least from the lawyer side, our training teaches us to look for the worst case scenario. That's what makes us great lawyers, is identifying all the possible things that can go wrong. Like, what's the worst case scenario? What's another one? What's another one? What's another one? And that's really great for our careers because we're able to protect our clients. We're assessing risk. We're protecting them from risk. But the catch is that our brains don't know that that's not useful 24/7. And so our brains are still using those same neural pathways to process our personal problems and our emotional problems and just our lives in general. And so it's hard for us to see anything for what it is. We're only seeing things for what they could potentially be, which is awful, awful, awful. And that leads to depression. Like, whether or not it's like with a capital D depression or just, being a super negative, pessimistic person, having those thought patterns is going to affect you mentally. And so when that's where your brain is going, where you end up is, I'm miserable. And you may not even know why, but that's where I see a lot of it starting. And that was my experience. And with claims adjusters, I would think it's the same thing, because you're trying to identify like what happened, what really was going on. And that's the value you give.
That's such a great point. And I had never actually, and you and I, we haven't prepped for this episode, in case anyone's wondering. We just literally just got on and decided to chat. I've never really thought about that. And that's so true. We're designed at least 8, 9, 10 hours a day to be looking out for our clients. And the best way to do that is to look at a doomsday scenario. You do look at, and you advise your clients, here's the best course of action, but you're really designed to protect the downside to some extent.
Yeah.
Alex, what do you think? What's your take on why there's so many lawyers that don't like it?
I think it's such a great point that Annie brings up, because, as someone who was in law, but also now in sales and business development, there's almost like a different perspective and different values in each of the professions. So in law, you are looking out for risk. You are analyzing all the potential downsides. But in sales and business development, it's very different. You're always analyzing the upside, a rejection, a failed conversation, a failed meeting. Those don't really matter, because you kind of focus on what the potential is. And so you have a lot of people who, who are probably inclined towards looking at some of the downside, capping their risk. And so it can get pretty discouraging, and there's some amount of depression. I know that's pretty endemic in our profession. I think one more thing that I've come to realize is that those first 5 years, or those junior years, are pretty tough. And, as I'm seeing, I'm 10 years out of law school now, I'm seeing my friends who have made it through. I do think that the practice does change as you become more senior. And you don't have to necessarily stay in practice in a conventional way. I think back to my story where I saw the senior partner with kind of a job that I would never want, but he's certainly not the only one who's practicing. And that's the beauty of, I think, LinkedIn and other ways. If you talk to a lot of senior attorneys or people with legal backgrounds, so many people are doing such interesting things that, before I would say, oh, I'm not going back to practice law, but now I'm thinking, I'll keep that possibility open, just because, I think I wasn't aware when I was junior, like, what potential and what possibilities there were out there.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point too. And we should separate, the junior associate putting in the sweat equity and learning and gaining experience. And there's, to some extent, especially in like my experience in the litigation side, is doing the grunt work. There's a process, a learning process there that you can't avoid. I'm with you. I'm 22 years out, I guess, and in a leadership position, and it feels so much different than when I practiced. And I think for me, the turning point, let me say, like I said, I hated around the 5 to 7 year mark, as did all of my friends. And it wasn't until I stepped out from a boss and became a leader that I loved it. It was something about working for somebody else and trying to please them that I think really stifled my growth and my happiness. So, and I try not to lose sight of that as a leader now, trying to say to the younger associates, how can we make their careers better? I don't have all the answers, but it's a question that I ask myself. So I know it's a little bit off of what you said, Alex, but I love that idea or that concept of that first year, the first 5 years is hard because you are working a crazy amount. And if you're on the billable model, you have that pressure too. So how do you manage that? Can you just push through? Are there, tools that we can give people or talk about to manage that, to make it enjoyable? What do you think, Annie? What are some of the things that you have found that younger associates, let's focus on the younger generation, the younger associates can do to actually enjoy what they do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just to piggyback a little bit on what you said, first of all, I just want to throw a party for you being as a leader, wanting and acknowledging that there's a need to help associates. Because I loved how you said, when you went from being a boss to being a leader, things changed. And that's another one of the big factors that I see when I'm working with junior associates, especially. And it was a big part of my story was lawyers aren't taught how to be managers. They're not taught how to work in business. And yet lawyers run law firms and they manage people. And so unless you have somebody who's like a natural leader or has just like an unbelievable amount of empathy, it's gonna compound, because you're gonna have the stuff we talked about earlier with like the negative pessimism and all that. And then you have somebody who doesn't know how to manage people well or how to help people thrive. So step one would be having someone like you and spreading that in like the legal culture where we actually need to pay attention to our associates' well-being. And in big law, I'm married to a big law attorney. And so I see it firsthand in our group of friends and then how his career has played out. But we need to value associates as not treat them as expendable. There is a value to institutional knowledge. And it probably because I worked in smaller boutique firms, that value was more noticeable. But in big law, they just like throw people out. Like it's no big deal. Like, oh, we'll just hire another one. And I'm like, but then you have to train them again. And they don't know how to do things. And then that puts pressure on your senior associates because the partners aren't going to train them. So, it does, a lot of it is going to come from the leadership side. And just the fact that you are having this podcast episode, Tricia, is huge. Like that, just that awareness is the first step. And then also, and this is something that is talked about a lot, but the mental health side of it. I don't have the answer, but the mental health aspect it cannot be overstated. And actually I owe like my mental health to the first managing partner. He's the guy who signed my bar certifications back there. And we're still really close. I love him and I liked working for him. It was just other things that didn't work out. But he sat me down one day and he said, have you ever had a panic attack? And I was like, what's a panic attack? And he's like, well, this is what my panic attacks feel like. And I was like, oh, all day, every day for like the last 7 years or however long, starting in law school. That's my life. He's like, no, you go call up a psychiatrist and you say panic attacks and they will help you out. I was like, oh. And so I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder. And so I was able to start getting treatment there. So, I was lucky to have someone who had anxiety like I did, but I don't know how it looks, but having someone or some mechanism where we can see what's going on with our associates and be like, hey, guess what? What you're going through, that's normal anxiety. That's not. Because even the therapist that I went to in law school, I felt like something was off and they were like, oh, no, you're just in law school. That's normal. It was not normal. It was not normal. I needed medication. I needed medication for the rest of my life. And so I'm loud and proud about that, because anybody who needs the medication or needs treatment in any way, just get it. It's just like going to the doctor and if you break a bone, get a cast. Same thing.
And I think like that is something we are seeing changing in the law profession, is the more open, honest discussions about mental health that 10 years ago, at least I didn't see it 10 years. I don't know if I saw it even 5 years ago, where if you were stressed out or having anxiety, it was just part of the job. You weren't handling it. You don't know how to handle it. This job isn't for you because you should be able to handle that stress that comes at your way. And I think we're having this conversation now, and a lot of people, law firm leaders, are starting to address it, or at least create an environment that those conversations can have.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. I mean, that's really the first step, and I'm loving that we're seeing that.
I mean, there's a business side of this also, right? Because, as I think, Andy, you mentioned, if you have a lot of turnover, that hurts the business too. And so, the churn and burn may work for some business models, but it seems like there's a move, maybe there's client pressures. I mean, Tricia, you would know this better than any of us. Maybe there's pressures on fees, and, the business model is changing, maybe considering all sorts of different alternative fee structures. And so, I think one of the parts of Big Law that the reason why so many people aren't happy is that people aren't treated like humans. They're treated like billing machines. And that's changing. And so as that's changing, I think we're starting to talk more about, the well-being of associates, because the longer you stay, the better it is for the firm. We see that a lot in the startup ecosystem. It's just very different when, that's kind of where I work now, where, because there's so much competition for talent, companies are more aware, and they do a lot to make sure that the people are feeling good, taken care of. Sometimes it can go a little far. You have ping pong tables and foosball tables, but it's just a very different environment than a law firm that's more traditional. So, I'm curious if you guys have seen, that changing in the past few years, because it seems like in the startup world, it's been like that for a little while.
Yeah, I think, law firms are very notorious for just not changing very quickly and sticking with their roots. But I think they're starting to look to the tech world, the startup world, Silicon Valley. I mean, I know I do. I don't read anything about law firms. I read a ton about what startups are doing and their cultures that are creating. But I think it is starting to change, but it is turning a very large ship. When I graduated from law school in 1998, I saw so many of my law school friends take different paths, and many of them went to that Big Law where it was no less than 80-hour weeks. I had a friend of mine to go to New York, and we went to go visit him, and he was still working at midnight on Friday night. And that he got Sunday off, but maybe like a half a day. But that was their model, is they knew he wouldn't stick around. He wouldn't stick around for more than 2 years. They would invest 2 years, and they would just take everything they could from him. And in exchange, if he could last that long, he got a lot of knowledge. But at what cost? Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that firm is still doing that. I haven't been following them. But I still think there is a lot of that going on, because profits over people, you see it often. The bigger changes that I see are really happening in the more boutique firms, the smaller firms. People are stepping out to create their own practices, which I am a huge proponent of. Everybody I know that has stepped out and done their own thing loves it, because they're controlling their own destiny. They're accepting the clients they want to accept. So that's my take on that. I don't know if you guys agree or not.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, seeing the Big Law side of things through my husband and my friends, and then also my clients, not a whole lot has changed there. And if it does, it's a lot of lip service to the change, but not a lot of action, especially in like the mentorship space and in the diversity space. So when I'm talking with women and people of color, and particularly women of color, it's rough. It's really rough. I wanted to touch upon one point you mentioned earlier, Tricia, which is about innovation. I think it touches upon diversity and, the mental health and well-being of associates, but also something that I deal with on a daily basis, which is technology. I'm seeing, because a little bit about my job. My previous job, I was selling e-discovery technology to law firms primarily, and you had different firms with different appetites for adopting new technology. So larger firms, very, very, I'm stereotyping and generalizing here, but larger firms are generally not receptive to bringing on new technology. Smaller, medium firms are, probably because they face more pressure to be efficient. Larger firms might not have to do that, at least not in the short term. And so, there's a lot of
innovation happening on what I call the smaller, medium, or the smaller end of the market. And now I work with in-house counsel. So we sell contract automation and AI for contracts technology to in-house lawyers. There's a lot of work that's being brought in-house to legal departments that is being taken away from a lot of these traditional big firms. And so I guess my point is that the smaller and medium-sized firms are where you're going to see innovation, not just in technology, which is what I see all the time, but I think also from the way management practices, how people are treating associates, diversity, because, at a firm, you can just, at a big firm, you can just rip and replace, and, maybe associates are fungible, but at smaller firms, they want to make sure everyone contributes to the firm's well-being equally. So diversity does help a lot with that. It's not just lip service. So I'm really optimistic about what's happening in the smaller and medium-sized firms, because I think right now, especially right now, we're seeing just a major change in so many different things. And, it's going to be the ones who are most nimble and innovative that are going to be able to adjust quickly to it. And one last thing is that, at my big firm, I have a story that I'm thinking about posting on LinkedIn. But there was this one partner at the big firm that I used to work at. He would not respond to our emails. He would have his assistant print out the emails, write comments on the side, have the assistant scan it, and then have it attached and sent back to me. And I'm thinking, we are in a different world now. If he can't figure out email, how's he figuring out Zoom? What's he doing now? So anyways, that's just a story from Big Law. But I'm curious, Trisha, you're in a smaller, medium-sized firm. I mean, it's, what's your view on innovation?
Yeah, I mean, Liz, I think it's probably the number one question I ask myself every day is, what can we be doing differently that would benefit our clients, benefit our associates, benefit our firm? Are there ways that associates, or if they're claims adjusters working for insurance companies that have an unhealthy culture, are there ways that you think they could be happy in their current job? Or is it something that you think they just have to get out of? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I can speak to that because the lawyers that come to me for career coaching, for the most part, they're like, I don't know. They're like, I just don't know. Do I need to leave? Do I need to stay? I just don't know. I'm so overwhelmed. But I think there's this it's a fear, and I relate to this. There's this fear where it's like, and you said this earlier, Trisha, I don't think I can cut it. I can, and that's part of the stigma behind the anxiety and everything, where it's like, oh, that's a character flaw. But no, it's not. And so we just have to strip all of those expectations away. And what I've found with my clientele is that a lot of them don't have to throw everything out like I did. There are ways. They're going to be different for each person, but, and it's not easy, but the benefits that people get are incredible. I have one client in particular who works in Big Law. And when she came to me, she was like, I want to be out of this job in 3 months. And I was like, it's ambitious, but let's start. Let's get on the right track. Short of that, what would you want? So we set out some goals. So I'm like, we have to step way back. We can talk about resumes and interviews and networking. That's a thing. And lawyers and claims adjusters, they're very capable people. I'm not worried about that stuff. But let's strip down everything else and figure out what's really important to you. What are your core values? What is it at your core that makes you tick? And we all have a general sense of that, right? We're like, oh, family's important to me, and relationships and, financial security, I'm like, okay, but I have this exercise that I have everyone go through before we even get on a coaching call, and narrow it down to 8, because it allows me to get to know them really quickly. So there's no therapeutic stuff going on, no backstories. I'm like, okay, this is what's important to you. Now let's look at your current job situation. Where are your values being smothered? Or which values are being ignored? Which ones are being completely trampled on? And there's usually an aha moment where they're like, oh, for me, it was freedom. Freedom is my top value far and away. And the irony of it was I became a lawyer in service of that value of freedom, because I grew up in rural Montana, and I did not have a stable, balanced childhood. It was very not normal. And I knew that on some level. And I was like, so how do I get out of here? And I was like, I'm smart. I'm going to make my own money and I'm going to leave. And so I was like looking around, like, what is like the easiest path for that? And a lot of my friends' parents were lawyers. And I was like, ooh, I can do that. All I have to do is be good in school. I already do that. So go to college, go to law school, be a lawyer. Boom, I'm leaving. I'm out. And so I did it. And it was a really, straight linear path. And I think that's why a lot of people pick that path who are, smart and motivated. They're like, that's a pretty direct path to financial independence and career success. So I was like, I got it. I had freedom. I had some loans, but I was able to like buy a house.
We could do a whole episode just on loans, by the way. Go ahead.
Forget it. Right. I still have them. And so, but I was able, I had that financial security that I didn't have growing up, and the sense that I didn't need to rely on my family or my partner or anything like that, that I had done it and that I had marketable skills that I could take anywhere. Except I couldn't. I could only practice where I was barred. And I had to work for other people. I mean, as a baby attorney, you can open your own shop, but it's tougher. It's a little riskier. And so, like we've been talking about, those early years, you really like, how do you get through those? Because there's really not a lot of other ways to go. And so it was after those 5 years, maybe 4. I mean, I wasn't happy for much of it, but when the realization came, and I was like, so getting here, that was freedom for me. But now that I'm independent and I'm free and I'm creating my own way, freedom looks different. Freedom is being able to think about moving somewhere with my husband and it not ruining one of our careers.
I really love this core value thing because that's exactly what, the way I see it. So, in my experience, I think the reason why people, it could be lawyers, it could be claim adjusters, it could be actually anybody. A lot of times when people are unhappy at their jobs, it's not really the tasks. It's often the organization, whether it's the values, the way the teams are structured. So I learned very early on, my personal values is that I don't like to deal with rules that I think are silly. So my first job out of college, I went to IBM, big company. I worked for Big Law, big company. I never fit in. And I thought I was a bad employee because I always got these silly rules. And I said, I'm not going to fill out this self-performance review once a month, like and color coded red, yellow, orange, whatever. Like I was like, this is silly. So I wouldn't do well. Right. But then I went to the startup world where there were no really rules. And it was just, can you actually do something that brings revenue to the company? And that means I can go out and do, have autonomy, do things I want. And so I think that first step is like that self-knowledge, knowing what you're about, what Annie said, knowing what your values are. Do you want to travel? Do you want to have the freedom to travel financially? Or do you, are there other things that you care about? For me, I cared a lot about autonomy. So I knew that I had probably had to go to a smaller place. And so, time to time, you do in your journey, come across other opportunities that may seem like good ones, but you may need to turn them down if you know yourself well. And I think it's hard, especially I don't know for claim adjusters. I don't know how many years out they are. They are these senior people who have seen had a lot of experiences, or are they relatively junior? But I think early on, it's really hard to know without knowing, having put yourself in those situations where you're unhappy at a job. But as as time goes on, you learn a lot about yourself. I bet both of you know a lot about yourself that you didn't know maybe 10 or 20 years ago. That's something true for me, So I know so I know what scenarios to avoid for myself. And I think, a lot of folks who are unhappy, just keep trying to find it, know yourself. And then one actionable thing that I think helped me was, even though I'm unhappy at a job, I might come up with a side project that's helpful to the business. That's not in my core, job role, but that's more in line with what I enjoy doing. And then if it grows, it could become a bigger part of my job. But if it doesn't, maybe I need to find another job that does more of that. So that's what's worked for me.
Those are great points. And the core values that you both talk about, I think is a awesome mental exercise for anybody to think about really what's important to you, really what do you love, and hone in on that. And that I I would, if I had asked myself that question at 25 or whenever I got out of law school, I don't even remember how old I was. Maybe it was 28. I don't know. I wouldn't have been able to answer that. I'm 40, almost 47, and I can answer that now. And I look back and I see these themes through my career. And like you, autonomy and flexibility were always important to me. Freedom, very important to me. And when I was in a bigger firm, and I would get the email from my boss at 8 a.m. like, when are you coming in? And I'd be like, are you checking up on me? Like, I always made my billables, like, stop. Like, I'm a grown up, I'm a grown woman. I know what my obligations and goals are. I and I always hated that about the law profession, is like, you have that FaceTime stuff. It's just BS. But the autonomy, flexibility, and freedom were, I think, my number one core values. And for me, I would say anybody who can make it, if litigation or being a lawyer is really what you want to do, in order to achieve that flexibility and freedom, you have to control the purse. You have to have clients. You have to, so that you can take them wherever you want. If you're not happy where you are, you can take them and go somewhere else. You can open up your firm. You can take them with it to another firm that has a culture that supports what you want to do with life. And in order to control the purse and get the clients, you got to start from day one out of law school. So if you can make it through the first 5 years at a law firm, and you can soak up as much knowledge as you can, and you can network and market during those periods, I think the 5 to 7 year mark is you should have some flexibility. And that, at least that was in part my journey. I didn't market nearly as much. Everyone told me, when you get out of law school and you start practicing, you need to network and market. I'd be like, who has time for that? And in that respect, I'd be like, you need to make time for that's more important than your billables. I think from a selfish standpoint, if you can even come close to hitting your billables, even if you're short, spend the rest of your work life developing relationships. That will give you the flexibility that you need. If being a lawyer and litigator, or whatever private practice is your thing, that's a path, I think, because until you control your destiny, if you're always working for somebody else, I don't see how that gives happiness. But I did want to double back to something that you said, Alex, which is finding a hobby and kind of doubling down on that and finding something you enjoy, because that's my experience. And I, probably around 44, 45, I discovered real estate and I loved it. Like, we have a couple investments and it's fascinating to me. And then I started reading all about it. And then I started listening to podcasts. And if I had not listened to the real estate podcast, Bigger Pockets, incessantly for a year, I never would start this podcast. Like, I was like, it just opens up your mind to different things. So if you're unhappy in your present job, focusing on maybe logistically you can't get out of it. Maybe you're the only breadwinner. Maybe you're a single parent. Maybe whatever outside influences that you just can't pick up and leave, that you're maybe stuck in it for a little bit longer, is to focus on a side hustle or a hobby and figure out where that will lead you. Because oftentimes, if you do double down on what you love and throw fuel on that, you can find an alternative path that it wouldn't have been clear to you before.
Yeah, and it doesn't take much either. I remember when I was in Big Law, I read this book about Charlie Munger. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He's a lawyer who left the practice of law to work with Warren Buffett and did very well. I think he's a billionaire multiple times over. But he has this one quote where he says, however much he was billing out when he was a lawyer, he saved one of those hours every day for himself. And so what I started doing was every morning before I went into the office, Big Law in New York starts really late. So I was able to do this, obviously pre-kid, before I was married. I would just spend that hour, start small, and work on my writing and blogging. And so it doesn't have to be, I think to your point, Tricia, it doesn't have to be something that you do that's big right now. It could be something you cultivate like a little flame, you don't need to pour gasoline on the fire yet until the time is right, but just keep doing it. And I think it's a great story that, you started following Bigger Pockets podcast and now you have your own and you've got a big readership. But I think when it started, it was probably just started with one single podcast, one small thing, and it grew from there.
Yeah. I mean, it started with me, like I got into real estate because I read The Miracle Morning or Morning Miracle by Hal Elrod. I don't know if you guys have read that, but he talks about something similar, morning routine. And part of his morning routine is meditation, exercise, affirmations, visualization, and reading. And for me, that was the biggest chunk. So I would get up at 5 and I would have an hour and a half of my miracle morning. And part of it was reading. And I just started reading about real estate. I read maybe 20 pages every day. And that just, I got this love and I couldn't get enough of it. So it just made me keep reading. I didn't want to stop. And then I'm like, all right, I really do have to put this down. I do have to get to work. And then like you said, it was the small steps. And about a year into that process, we bought our first investment property and I loved it. Right. And we bought a couple since then, but it's the small steps in life that if you are not happy with where you are, start with the small steps, and it could be different for everybody, whatever that small step for you is. But starting with something that you know makes you happy and just adding a little bit of your day, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever you can afford, and focus in, take that me time. That's awesome advice.
And one thing I'll add to that is that I get people who come to me and they're so worn down. They're like, I don't like to do anything. They're like, I don't have hobbies. I don't have interests. I've just been swallowed up by my job. And that's very real for them. But again, this all goes back to the values. Once we start talking about core values, and like you said this earlier, Tricia, too, like you wouldn't have been able to do that earlier. Now you can kind of rattle off your top values. And I'll often tell people it feels like nailing Jell-O to the wall. Like it seems like it should be easy and you should be able to figure it out, but it's a little messy. And it's through that process of doing the hippy dippy values dive where you realize people will often be like, oh, I really used to, care about what I wore. And it wasn't that I was materialistic or anything like that, but I'm really creative, and fashion is like a way for me to express myself. And I totally forgot about that. And like, that's just like the beginning of their rabbit hole, and who knows where it will go. And maybe it'll go nowhere. That's the other thing. I want to tell anyone who's in this position where they feel like I hate my job and I don't know what to do. Just step one is giving yourself permission to explore and just think, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe it is. Either way, it's okay. I don't have to make a change right now or ever, but give yourself the permission to explore it and know what you're feeling and figure out what's most important to you. Because if you start at that very basic level of values, you guys have just told everyone how far that can take you.
Yeah. And I think, if you're also not happy in your job, there's got to be parts of it that you like. There's got to, to sit down and do that mental exercise of I'm sure you don't hate 100% of it. Maybe you hate 80%. What does the 20% look like? And, and I'll just bring this back to me. And I don't want to make this podcast about me, but I relate to this feeling. So I just want to share. But when I went to law school, it was, I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to help women get out of domestic violence. I really was like, I'm going to go work for whatever organization to help that situation, because I thought they all needed lawyers. And then I got out of law school and ended up clerking for an appellate court judge, because I thought this is great for my resume. But the salary was very low and I deferred my loans for 2 years. And then when that ended, my deferment was gone. And then I started interviewing for those type of jobs. And I'm like, I saw the salary. I'm like, there's no way I can afford that with student loans. It was like $28,000 a year. My loans were like $25,000 a year. And I'm like, there's no way I can live. So I had to put that on the back burner. And my career path took me away from why I went to law school. I didn't see myself as helping people. I just took jobs for money and, to advance a career, like very linear approach. And it wasn't until I think 15 years later, I managed to get to a point where I had the flexibility in managing an office, that I rediscovered what I loved, which I really loved helping my clients. I loved helping them shut things down and get out of conflict. And even though I deal with conflict all the time, the part of my job that I love the most is when we can come together and compromise and I can help them reach that goal of getting out of conflict. So I've kind of circled back to, that's the part of my job I love. I hate having these adversarial discussions with plaintiffs' counsels, fighting over stupid, discovery disputes. I can't stand that. I don't know why people do it, but that is the part of my job that I hate. But I think that's smaller and smaller because I tend to focus on the parts that I love. How about you guys? Do you guys have a similar experience?
Yeah, that's kind of describes my journey. You know, when I probably had 95% of my job that I didn't like, and that slowly grew from there. And when I opened my own practice for that brief moment, that's when I realized, it took a while to realize that's what I wanted, which was to do sales, marketing, business development, something client facing or customer facing. Over time, that's grown. So very similar to you. Right now, my job is not 100% what I love. There's a balance, right? But I would say, most of what I do every day, I really enjoy.
Yeah.
How about you, Annie?
Same, so I did a really big leap, and it's a very big change, and it's like, oh, I love it. And I really do. Like, I have to be very careful about putting appropriate boundaries around the type of work that I do, or like when I'm working, because I would just work all the time because I just really enjoy it. But I also don't enjoy every aspect of it. Like, I don't enjoy the bookkeeping aspect of it, and I don't enjoy like I like doing website stuff for my website, but I'm not good at it. So, it's like a waste of time in a lot of ways. And I really like planning. Like, I'm a big picture person. That's why like the details of legal practice really like annoy me. So I really like collaborating with people. Like, I'll do a joint webinar with someone, and they're usually a former lawyer. And so they're really good with the details. And I'm like, here's the big picture, and like, here's what we're going to do. And they're like, great, I'll create a whole outline. I'm like, perfect. So that's another part of it, is finding those parts of your job that you don't like and ways to take the focus off for you, or to even kind of outsource them in a way. They're never going to go away, but you focus on them less when you have more that you love. And I was like you, Alex, I hated like 95% of what I did. It was just everything. And it's funny because you said this earlier, you're like, oh, maybe like the law isn't closed off for me. And I see all these discussions on LinkedIn too, where it's like, well, maybe it really wasn't that I had to leave altogether. Maybe it was just a few select things. But I 100% of the time, I'm like, nope, can't do it. Totally. For like a split second, I'm like, maybe I left too. Nope. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is it.
And it's scary. It's scary I imagine for both of you guys, it was scary to take that leap from what you had, your thought process when you were in law school and what you thought would be your career path, and then what actually ended up being your career path. And that's not a light switch change. It usually happens over time. And then it's just, you've just decided to take the step, right? What advice would you guys give to people that want to take that step and do want to get out of the practice of law and want to do something else, whatever it may be? Are there any actionable advice you would give that person?
Yeah, I think for me, and this is one thing I feel kind of passionate about, and I tell people a lot, which is generally you got to know what you're good at and bad at, what you like to do, what you don't like to do. If you can't tell me what you're bad at and what you don't like to do, you probably shouldn't take a leap. You should try. So what I did was I actually tried multiple law jobs. I had a hunch that maybe law wasn't right, but I took the time to try different law jobs. So when the time came to make the jump to legal tech, I knew like I had crossed off these potential avenues. Whereas I think a lot of people, they may have one or two jobs that they don't like, and they say, all right, I'm done with law. Let me do this other thing. But that's just, jumping into the unknown, and you don't really have that self-knowledge to carry you through those uncertain times. So I would say, maybe not the first move. You have to necessarily leave law. Maybe you want to learn more about what you enjoy, what you don't like about the jobs, grow your side projects and hobbies to a point where you understand what your strengths are. But that's what I would say, just knowing your strengths and your weaknesses.
That's a good exercise. And let me just follow up one question yet for that. What about the concern that jumping around may look bad? What do you say to people like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you do jump around, I think jumping around can be contextual. So for example, maybe jumping around means staying at a job for 2 to 3 years and then moving. But if you do find yourself jumping around maybe once a year, which I know is for law is a big no-no, maybe that should say something about, think about why did you jump? Maybe you don't belong in a profession that says 2 years is too short a time to stay at a place. Like, so in the startup land, if you're in tech, 2 years is a very long time. I think as long as you're there over a year, you're good. And if you have multiple 8-9 month stints, they're okay with it. So it also is a question of, why am I jumping so much? And, maybe trying to stay a little bit longer, but if you keep on jumping, maybe that law is not the right place for you.
And I think being careful where you jump from too. So if you're jumping from one law firm to the same law firm to the same law firm, you're doing the same kind of practice of law, that's hard to justify. But that's just, for me as an interview, that's a red flag. But if you're jumping from, let's say you're doing a defense, maybe you tried plaintiff's practice, and then you jumped to defense practice, and then you went to a larger firm, and then you went to a smaller firm. If you can differentiate why you jumped, and you can say, look, I'm trying things. I don't know. This is what I want to do. This is what I want to try next. Maybe not try next. You don't want to say that to your potential boss. But I think, if you can explain why there are jumps, I don't think they matter as much for the right place. Because I think your point is well taken. If somebody's not going to interview you because you have, year after year after year of jumping, then that's probably not the place for you anyway. But if you get in that interview process and you get in the door, you can explain, look, I'm trying to find what I love. And now I know this is what I want to do. That's, I think, the best approach for that. But what about you, Annie? What advice would you have?
Again, I'm so glad you said that, because I say that and I feel like my clients don't always believe me. And I'm like, no, it's true. If you can explain it and you can talk about what you've learned and the skills that you have and how that value translates into the new job, why does it matter how long you were somewhere? That's great. And with what you were saying, Alex, is like knowing what you want and trying things. That's a huge sticking point for a lot of lawyers, is like, they're afraid they're going to make a mistake. And a lot of us at first, it's a whole process where you get to the point where you want to leave law or do something really different. But it's like, did I make a mistake going to law school? Did I make a mistake becoming a lawyer? Oh my gosh, I feel like a failure and like I can't cut it. And what if I make another mistake because I picked this bad job? And so it just spirals into this whole, like, oh my God, I'm going to make a mistake. And I'm like, whoa, you got to take the pressure off. As unfair and, seemingly untenable as it is, you can't really know if a job is going to be for you until you do it. Like, that's the only way to 100% know. But there are other ways to figure it out before you make that leap. And that's like going with your values and your strengths and your weaknesses and talking to people. It goes back to the networking aspect, where people tend to think like, oh, informational interview, I am, hoping to get a job from this person. As soon as people are able to like file that away and see it more as, I'm just trying to learn more about what this person does to see if it's for me. They're like, oh, I can do that. Like, that's easy. And I'm like, yeah. And people are going to be kind of flattered that you want to know about them. Like, we're all wired to want to help people. If someone, DMs me and it's like it's not a rando person, but like they've been following my posts and they know what I'm about and they want to ask me a specific type of question about my experience. I'm like, oh my gosh, of course. Like, let's hop on the phone. And so that's a part of it. And again, Alex, like you said, doing it on the side if you can. Like, I started my coaching stuff while I was still an attorney. I just didn't tell them I was doing it. I mean, it wasn't really a conflict, but they didn't need to know. They would have freaked out, I'm sure. But I started I took my coaching certification classes. And because I was like, well, if it doesn't work out, if I realize this isn't what I want to do, I still have my day job, and it took a lot of extra work, and I was pregnant and it was not a great pregnancy, but I was so energized by what I was trying to do that I was able to do it. And so just again, going back to like the values, when you figure out what it is that really motivates you and what's really important to you, and eventually like, what is this job change going to do for me? How is my life going to be better when I'm in a job that I actually enjoy or that has meaning? And it can be like, I will be able to sleep better at night. I'm going to be able to afford a house where my kids each have their own bedroom. I'm going to be able to sleep at night because I have financial security, those sorts of things. And so when people start thinking in terms of how their life is going to change, they start to focus less on, is this next step a mistake? Am I doing the right thing? They're just like, I'm just going to check it out. I'm going to get some data. I'm going to analyze that data. And maybe I want to go further. Maybe I don't. And that'll help with the jumping around. But Tricia, I loved what you said about like how you can leverage that, because I'm a firm believer in you can't know 100%. You can do a lot of due diligence, and I've had clients have the old bait and switch where they're told one thing and they pull it and it's different. And it's tough to explain, but you can.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, one piece of advice I would give to people that aren't happy is try not to be afraid of the mistake or the failure, and give things a try. I made a lot of mistakes in my career, but almost every single one of them has benefited me in the long run in some way, shape, or form. So, you make that mistake. And the job jumping, I think, is becoming less and less. Millennials, if I can just stereotype for a moment, millennials have been job jumping for a long time. So the chance of you coming across a young lawyer or claims adjuster under 35 that hasn't job jumped is slim to none. Like, it's just, they are trying more things and trying to figure out what makes them happy. And I think that's becoming more acceptable. So I wouldn't worry about it as much as maybe 20 years ago, but I would definitely say, try new things and be okay with that may not be the answer for you, but you're only going to know unless you walk the walk.
Yeah.
Well, let me start to wrap this up. I got a couple more questions for you. But first, let's just talk closing thoughts. Somebody listening to this who either just hates 99% of their job. Just what would you say to them?
Sure. I would say if you hate your job, invest some time in exploring side projects. Take the time to do self-knowledge, know what you're good at and bad at. I feel like I'm a broken record, but I think it's okay if you don't have all the answers. I mean, even now I don't have all the answers. I have hunches. I have pretty strong ideas of what I don't like, but I also don't know what the next 10 years will lead me to. So experiment, try new things and learn about yourself, and then make decisions based on those new pieces of information. Don't just go after the same prestige jobs or the same big companies just because everyone else is doing it. Know yourself and know what's right for you.
I love that. What about you, Annie?
Yeah, like piggybacking on that, and I think one of the first things I tell people when they just call me to meet me the first time is I'm like, you're not alone. You are not the only person who hates 99% of your job, especially if you're a lawyer, claims adjuster, anyone, you're not alone. And so it's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. You're in a tough spot. That's all. And so it's also not going to be forever. It's temporary. And it's hard to internalize that when you're in it because you just cannot see the end. And your brain is taking you down all those like worst case scenarios and the issue spotting. But I have this, I have the money. I'm the breadwinner. I have a mortgage, I know. And you're going to be able to take care of that too. So slow down, look at the values, do the self-exploration, start looking at what parts of your job you're really, really good at. Sometimes there's less emotion attached to that than there is to what do you like about your job. And then so you can start with, well, what am I really good at? Like, what do people come to me for specifically? And then say, do I actually like doing that or am I just good at it? And that can be like a good way to bridge that. But those little steps are enough. When you're really in it and you really hate it, the little steps are enough and they will build on themselves if you just give yourself the permission to keep questioning and trying things. And above all, talk to other people. Like I said, you're not alone. Reach out to other people and just ask them what their job is like.
Yeah, I think talking to the people, that was going to be mine. You stole mine.
Oh, sorry.
That was going to be mine too, is because if you haven't already, most people I know that hate their jobs are already talking to people. But if you haven't already, definitely reach out to more people and outside your circle of friends. Like go on, your parents' friends or social media or whatever it may be, and start reaching out to people and asking them how did they got out of their situation? If they didn't like their job, how did they got out of their situation? And maybe that'll start some creative juices flowing in your head. Maybe it won't, but it's an actionable thing that you can do today. That's not going to cost money and not going to ruin your job. So, but I think it's a great discussion. Let me just throw a little fun question at you. Are you guys reading anything, or what's a book that you would recommend, a non-lawyer book that you would recommend that you're either reading now or you've read the past year?
I recently read Range. The author's name escapes me. It's a book about how generalists triumph in an uncertain world. We always talk about specializing, but the world as it becomes more uncertain, you're going to need skills that are flexible and adaptable. And so the book does a really great job of describing examples. I think they use the example of Federer, who's a great tennis player, but he started off with a different sport, and that cross training helped him in the long run. So highly recommend that book. It's called Range.
How about you, Annie? What are you up to these days on the reading front?
So I was talking to someone about this the other day. Like, I cannot finish a book right now. It's like my attention span. I have like a bunch of like half-started ones. And I've gotten pretty close because I started Atomic Habits before the pandemic. And that is amazing. That's been really great for some of my clients to think about too, because I'm very resistant to like habits and structures. And Alex, like you, I'm like, that's a dumb rule. Like, why would I do that? Like, and so when someone's like a habit just for the sake of having a habit doesn't work for me. And so I really like the construct in there where he's like, well, you have to think about the person you want to be and the habit that's going to help you become that person. So like with a client, it'll be like, well, what do you want to be? Well, I want to be like a carefree lawyer. I want to be the opposite of a worrying lawyer. It's like, okay, so what habits are going to help you with that? So I haven't finished that, but I mean, there's already so many takeaways. And one book that I always recommend to people who are feeling really stuck and kind of like scared, like what's going on? How do I get out of this? Is Daring Greatly by Brene Brown.
I love her.
And she has so many books and they all kind of overlap. But Daring Greatly, I think, is the one that really covers everything, like vulnerability, shame, all that kind of stuff. And you don't realize like how applicable it is to you because we just don't really talk about those things. And there are so many things with lawyers that are kind of taboo to talk about. And so that one, it can really crack people open in a really great way.
I saw her Netflix special, and what struck me the most was when her TED Talk went viral and she went into a huge state of depression because she was like, and she got all this hate mail about how she looked and stuff. And then she was like, then I had an epiphany where I'm like, unless you're in the arena with me, unless you're putting yourself out there, I'm not listening to you. And I'm like, amen, sister, because that's exactly what we should be. Like, if you're putting yourself out there and doing something different, taking a risk, and you're getting this negativity from people that aren't in the arena with you, screw them. Like, just don't listen to them. And I was like, I've seen that a couple times since then. So
good.
I would say the book that I've gone back to the most, and I judge ones that I go back and reread, is The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. And he talks about how you can lifestyle design, which is really what I've been doing, is designing the lifestyle that I want and not what society or anybody tells me I should have. And his whole thing is how you can only work 4 hours a week and still be happy. Now, that doesn't apply to lawyers, but he has a lot of great information on how you batch things together, and great actionable takeaways about how you can design your life and have your career. And he asked some great questions that I go back and I skip around when I go back, but whenever I'm feeling down or I'm not sure that I'm doing the right thing, especially the social media stuff, if I'm like, am I wasting my time? What am I doing? Like, I'll go back and read paragraphs of him, and because he's very inspirational. So I would say pick that book up. But all right, so we'll wrap up. Alex, why don't you tell our listeners what you do and where people can find you?
Sure. I'm the director of business development at Evisort. It's a contract intelligence technology that relies on AI and was founded out of Harvard Law and MIT. That's my day job. On the side, I post a lot on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Alex Su. I post a lot about my journey from law to legal tech and a lot of other topics. Sometimes I write some controversial stuff, so take a look at my posts if you're interested.
Love it. How about you, Annie?
So I'm a lawyer career coach. I work exclusively with lawyers, and I founded a company called JD Nation, and it's just focused on coaching and trainings for lawyers. So you can find me at thejdnation.com, or I'm on LinkedIn. That's pretty much the only social media I'm using right now. It's just Annie Little, and comment on something I post. That's my favorite way to get to meet people.
Well, thanks, guys. I mean, that's how I met both of you guys. Was I came across your post and I started following. I'm like, and there's not a lot of lawyers that are really putting themselves out there and doing original content. A lot of people are sharing articles and case updates, but to come up with an original idea and post about it, especially if it's personal, which you guys do a lot, that's how it struck me, you know, and when it came across my feed, it really hit me in the face and it made me stop, which is the goal, right? Trying to get people to stop when they're scrolling through their feed. So I love what you guys are doing on LinkedIn. If you are not following Alex or Annie yet, then make sure you do, because they really do focus on just great content that adds value to people's lives and makes their lives better. They're not selling you. And I think that's what is awesome about both of you. So I appreciate you coming on and taking the time to kind of do a little bit of a deep dive and on your experiences and your advice. Anecdotal evidence is, I think, fantastic to help other people, and you guys did a great job. So thank you. All right. Well, listen, guys, if you have not already, please hit that subscribe button, give us a rating and a like. I appreciate it. And join us next time on The Defense Never Rests. We'll see you then.